This video is a continuation from the previous. Common region. As you see, we've looked before at columns of circles that appear columns because of the color. Now you'll see that they have been regioned. Basically, we drew rectangles. Oh, the other one's a square. Well, no, they're rectangles, not perfect square. Rectangles around them. The first one actually looks like a domino with its 8 dots. And that now in our minds and our brains and our eyes, that border separates and differentiates those circles so that the ones on the left belong to that tribe or group or form, and the ones on the right belong to that one. So these are not a common group of 20 circles. They are 2 groups of circles, and some of the people in the circles are black and some of the people are red. Past experience. Elements can be grouped together if the past experience of the observer was taught that they were grouped together. This is very similar to what we just did with the apple earlier. This is something that could be purely individual, or it could be something common to our society. And it's very difficult to manage this. So that's one of the reasons we're going to talk about cultural sensitivity, universal design. As much as possible, we're going to try to be as inclusive as we can, but it won't always work for everyone in every situation. And that is where it becomes difficult. And you start to have to make decisions the best that you can based on the information you have to work with. So, for instance, this image over here, we've got 9 shapes. And we can recognize them as 3 circles that are colored differently. We can recognize them as 3 squares that are colored differently, and we can recognize them as 3 triangles that are colored differently. But whether we perceive them as all yellow shapes, all green shapes, or all orange shapes, or circles, squares, and triangles can be entirely personal and entirely different. And if you were to design this and you designed it so that it was meant to be columns, different colored columns with shapes, it might be read differently by someone who sees circles. And so my suggestion as a designer is that empathy goes a very long way in consideration of your design. And what that means is when you design something, as best as possible, think about how others might perceive it. And the more as a designer that you open yourself up to new experiences and to new interactions with different people, the more knowledge and more research you'll do, the more knowledge you'll gain to help you see things through other people's eyes and think, well, I could understand how I've designed this building because I think this is the best way to organize it. But I could see, or I could begin to see how someone else might misinterpret that. Is there something I can do to resolve that? And, sometimes the answer is no, but we shouldn't be lazy and just say no because it takes more time and effort. A good design is universal and inclusive. Law of focal point. Our eye goes to a point of interest. That is biological, genetic makeup of the human brain. I'll give you an example. If I'm off to the side waving my hand, you're going to see me as a form first, but then you're going to look at my hand because it's a focal point, it's moving. And that is an evolutionary trait that came from the fact that when things move, they indicate something that might be chasing us, so we need to get out of there. It could indicate someone waving at us as a potential mate or partner or ally, and we want to recognize them because, strength in numbers. Because the other thing waving on the side could be a predator, and together the 2 of us might be able to escape it. or you might be able to outrun that guy and survive. So it is something that all mammals have. It is a trait. And so that point of interest or that focus can then be used in our designs to help us create points of interest. And points of interest bring people into the design. Again, back to that red door. It applies here as well. That red door is a focal point. And in this image here, Kandinsky, your eye goes to that dark, heavy black circle that's got a purple center and a red halo because it is different, it is large, it is interesting. And then from there, your eye moves around. And so when we look at that house with the red door, our eye goes to that red door, but then it doesn't stay there. It moves around. We notice the form, we notice there's a house. We then look at the red door. That is our entrance into the design. And then we go from there. And our eye then goes to other smaller points of interest or emphasis. And that starts to move you around the design. Okay, so good figure, law of simplicity. And that is basically people will perceive and interpret anything that is not easily recognizable as the simplest form possible, right? So for instance, we've got this image on the right that is an ambiguous form. It's not something we have a name for. We don't look at that and say, oh, I'm not even sure what I would call that. I can't even make up a name. That's how hard that is to do. That is a tri form. Let's just call it that. We wouldn't all look at that and go, oh, that's a triform. We'd look at that and go, I don't know what that is. So what ends up happening is you instead see the square, the triangle, and the circle in most cases. This is another good thing to say that whenever you are drawing something large and complicated, to make it easier on yourself, break it down into those simple possible forms. Those are understandable. Those are recognizable. Those make it easier for you to then process and absorb the larger, more complicated form and whole. Now, obviously, you have thought about this. Sometimes, we have seen two principles will be in play at one time. But one will almost always dominate our perception. And we looked at some examples of that previously. So in this case, both similarity and proximity are present, yet proximity in this case is the stronger principle. So you see 3 groups of circles instead of 6 columns of circles. Essentially, Gestalt principles are a set of tools that control how your designs are perceived. The perception someone gets from looking at your design is ultimately what you're communicating to them visually, right? We could write an entire book to describe something to someone. But what if they're a visual learner? What if they're a visual person? What if the words themselves don't generate that image in their minds that they need to understand? Well, learning to control those Gestalt principles, you learn to communicate through your designs. And here's some logos on the right that show exactly what that is. And one of my favorite logos ever created is this WWF panda. It's some black positive spaces on a white negative background that give the illusion of a panda. The Gestalt principles help us design better and help us understand when an element is needed or not and how to arrange it in your composition. They help you see where the elements should be placed and how they should be grouped together. Which elements should share a color or size and which shouldn't. Gestalt principles help you determine which elements should be enclosed inside a border and which elements simply need more white space between them. For example, look at the image on the right. There's no face there at all. We see one because of Gestalt principles. As you begin to understand how others will perceive your design using the elements and principles, you'll have more control over your designs, and that will help make you become a better designer because you will now be practicing an application of good application of principles and elements of design, what we consider good based on human psychology. So look at designs that you like and start to look at how Gestalt is working within them. Start to evaluate them. Study your own work that you're already doing and start saying, how could I make this better by applying Gestalt principles? In the image on the right, if you move a single element, you lose the skull. We see the skull because of Gestalt. When we look further, we see the woman at a vanity table. Gestalt is ultimately the basis for design. It's the basis for the principles and elements of design that we are going to study in this course and beyond in order to adeptly apply them now and in the future. In order to successfully complete this course, you are going to have to demonstrate that you understand them and that you can apply them to your work. Once you've mastered them, we'll then show you how to properly break them so that you can create your own unique and artistic styles. As I said before, art is not subjective. It's very objective. You know, what's subjective is taste, and you cannot control what people like. But you can control whether or not you are producing high-quality designs and artwork by studying and mastering the psychology behind good design, and that's Gestalt. And we would like to thank our source, Stephen Bradley, for the article he wrote that I pulled a lot of this material from, used a lot of his images in order to create this lecture for you all. He can be found at this link. Okay, I am going to end this video here and continue in the next.